Have you ever found yourself in a period of deep discomfort, feeling like everything you knew was falling apart, only to realize later it was the universe making space for something extraordinary? What if the quiet unraveling, the unsettling detachment, and the profound solitude you experience are not signs of loss, but rather sacred preparations for a blessing far greater than you can imagine? Could these challenging phases truly be the divine's subtle way of realigning you for your highest good, teaching you to need less so you can hold something infinitely more profound? I'm your host Alfred, and for today's video, we will be talking about signs when God is about to bless a Sigma woman greatly. The moment before a blessing is not always beautiful. Sometimes it is silent, sometimes it is lonely. Sometimes it feels like you are losing everything. But this is how the divine cleanse your hands, so you can hold something greater. Before God gives you more, He teaches you how to need less. In life, we often imagine divine blessings arriving with noise, celebration, applause, abundance. But in truth, when something sacred and significant is being prepared for a woman, what precedes it is often a mysterious stillness, a quiet unraveling, not because she's being punished, but because she's being realigned. And the real science, her response shifts. She no longer reacts the way she used to. Her nervous system begins to speak a new language, the language of trust, when God is about to bless a woman with something big. The first sign she may notice is an internal disturbance, a discomfort that shakes the core of her being. In this moment, everything she thought she knew about her life, her purpose, her roles, everything seems to be in flux. She might begin to feel restless, uncertain, and perhaps even overwhelmed. But it is in this disturbance, this internal discomfort, that the sacred preparation begins. It is not a punishment, not a random event. It is the universe, the divine, preparing her for a blessing so large that it requires a shift, a stretch, a transformation. The discomfort is the pressure that builds up in the soul before it can expand to hold something greater. You see, when God is about to elevate a woman, she is first required to face the deepest parts of herself. Often, this begins with discomfort, whether it's in her relationships, her job, or even within her own mind. She might find that people around her begin to treat her differently. Or perhaps she begins to feel disconnected from things that once brought her joy or security. This sense of disconnection can be unsettling, but it is precisely this discomfort that provides the necessary space for something new to enter. It is like the pain of childbirth, where the body must stretch and rearrange before bringing forth new life. The soul, too, must stretch to make room for a bigger blessing. And this process is neither quick nor easy. It requires patience, awareness, and a willingness to surrender to the journey, even when the path is unclear. In these moments of discomfort, many women make the mistake of seeking immediate relief. They want to return to their old way of life, the familiar, the comfortable. Yet if they take a step back and allow themselves to feel the discomfort fully, they will realize that this is not an obstacle, but a gift. Discomfort is the teacher that prepares them to let go of what no longer serves them. It helps them recognize the false beliefs, the limiting patterns, and the attachments that have kept them stuck in one place. And as painful as this may be, it is the first step toward liberation. The brain is wired to seek comfort and avoid pain. But when we only seek comfort, we miss the opportunities for growth that discomfort brings. Neuroscience shows us that when we are faced with discomfort, the brain activates certain regions that help us process and adapt to stress. This is a protective mechanism, But it is also a chance for transformation. When a woman learns to sit with discomfort rather than running from it, she begins to train her nervous system to stay calm in the face of uncertainty. This is where true growth happens, not in the moments of ease, but in the moments of discomfort when the soul is stretched. Consider the story of a woman named Maya. Maya had always been successful in her career, but she felt a deep sense of dissatisfaction that she couldn't explain. She had built her life around external achievements, her job, her relationships, her image. But deep inside, she knew something was missing. For months, she battled with this discomfort, trying to fill the void with more success, more validation, more things. But no matter how much she achieved, the discomfort remained. One day, Maya decided to step back and confront this feeling. She sat in stillness, allowing herself to feel the discomfort fully without judgment. In that silence, she began to realize that her identity had become too tied to external validation. She had been clinging to the idea of success, but it was no longer serving her. It was a hard realization, but it was the first step toward a greater understanding of herself. Maya's journey didn't end with that realization, but that was the moment when she stopped running from discomfort and began to see it as a sign that her soul was being prepared for something new. She began to redefine her purpose, to find joy in things beyond external achievements, and as she did, the discomfort slowly transformed into clarity, peace, and alignment. This transformation didn't happen overnight, but it began the moment she allowed herself to face the discomfort and trust that it was part of a greater plan. As women, we often resist discomfort because we think it's a sign of failure or that we are doing something wrong. But discomfort is often the precursor to a breakthrough. It is the divine's way of making space for something bigger, something more aligned with our true essence. And it is through learning to sit with this discomfort rather than running from it that we prepare ourselves for the blessings that are on their way. The second sign that God is preparing a woman for a big blessing is the experience of detachment from what once defined her. This could be a job, a relationship, a routine, or even a way of thinking. At first, this may feel like loss. It may feel as if she is being stripped of everything familiar and secure, but in reality, it is not loss. It is a divine, real lament. Detachment is not about giving up. It is about making space for something new to emerge. It is about surrendering what no longer serves her so that she can make room for what is meant to come. Detachment can be one of the most challenging parts of the journey. It often requires a woman to let go of her attachments to the things, people, or identities that have defined her for so long. This could be the attachment to her job title, her relationship status, or even the way she has been perceived by others. These attachments are like chains that keep her bound to the past, to the person she once was. But when God is preparing her for something bigger, she will begin to feel the pull to release these chains, even if it feels uncomfortable or scary. This is where the real transformation happens. Detachment is not about becoming cold or indifferent. It is about releasing the need for external validation and embracing the inner knowing that what is meant for her will find its way. This is where faith comes into play. Faith is not just about believing in something outside of ourselves. It is about trusting in the wisdom of our own soul and knowing that what is being taken away is making room for something better. When a woman detaches from what no longer serves her, she experiences a sense of freedom. She is no longer bound by the expectations of others, the weight of her past, or the fear of the unknown. Instead, she stands in her power, knowing that she is worthy of what is to come. This shift in perspective allows her to attract the people, opportunities, and experiences that are aligned with her highest good. The process of detachment can be likened to a tree shedding its leaves in the fall. The tree doesn't mourn the loss of its leaves. It knows that the shedding is necessary for new growth. Similarly, when a woman detaches from the things that have defined her, she is creating space for new growth, new blessings, and new opportunities to flourish. There is a woman I once knew named Grace, who had spent decades building a successful career in a corporate environment. She was well respected and admired for her achievements, but deep inside, she felt a quiet yearning for something more. It wasn't that she didn't enjoy her work, but she knew that there was more to life than just climbing the corporate ladder. Over time, she began to feel a sense of detachment from her job. She didn't feel the same excitement or fulfillment she once did. At first, she resisted this feeling, thinking that it was a sign of failure. But as she took time to reflect, she realized that her soul was asking her to let go of her attachment to her career. It wasn't that her work was bad or wrong. It simply wasn't aligned with her deeper calling anymore. Grace made the difficult decision to leave her job and pursue a path that felt more authentic to her. She didn't have all the answers, but she trusted that this detachment was leading her to something greater. Over time, she began to explore new passions, learn new skills, and build a life that was in alignment with her true purpose. And as she did, she attracted new opportunities, new people, and a deep sense of fulfillment that she had never experienced before. Grace's story is not unique. Many women at some point in their lives experience a sense of detachment as they outgrow certain roles or identities. It can be a painful process, but it is also a necessary one. Detachment creates space for something new to enter, and when we learn to embrace it, we find ourselves in the flow of life, open to receiving the blessings that are meant for us. Detachment also teaches us to embrace impermanence. Everything in life is in a constant state of flux: relationships, careers, even our own identities. When we cling too tightly to the things that once defined us, we block the flow of new blessings. But when we learn to let go, we create room for the new to emerge. And in this process, we learn to trust the divine timing of life, knowing that what is meant for us will always find its way. Detachment from what once defined her is rarely a moment of celebration. More often, it is a quiet, sacred moment of internal shift. A moment that a woman may not even notice at first. It begins subtly. The conversations she used to enjoy start to feel shallow. The daily routines that once gave her a sense of identity now feel like a performance. The roles she played so well, partner, mother, leader, caretaker, start to feel like garments that no longer fit. There's nothing inherently wrong with these roles, but something inside her begins to whisper, "You are more than this." And that whisper, though gentle, is unrelenting. This is the beginning of detachment. Not because she has stopped caring, but because she has started waking up. When the divine prepares a woman for a blessing far greater than what she has imagined, there is often a clearing, a release from the outside. This can look like her pulling away from familiar environments or people. But within, something deeper is happening. Her inner compass is realigning, pointing her towards something more authentic. This realignment requires space, and space cannot be created without letting go. Letting go is not always a dramatic act. Sometimes it looks like no longer forcing conversations that don't nourish her. Sometimes it looks like no longer chasing approval in relationships where she is not seen. Sometimes it's simply the internal act of no longer needing to prove herself to anyone. Including herself, this quiet detachment can be unsettling, especially for a woman who has built her identity on being reliable, needed, and constantly available. In many cultures, women are taught to define themselves by how much they can give. But at some point in her life, a woman who is destined for something sacred will begin to feel the weight of this, not because giving is wrong, but because she realizes she has been giving from a place that is disconnected from her own truth. One morning, she may wake up and feel a sense of emptiness, not because her life is empty, but because her soul is asking for a deeper kind of nourishment. This is not a sign of failure, it is a sign of awakening. There's a Zen teaching that says, when the cup is full, stop pouring. Many women have lived years pouring into everything around them. Relationships, jobs, communities, while never stopping to examine whether the cup they're filling is actually their own. Detachment begins when she finally pauses and asks, what am I pouring into? And is it giving anything back? At first, she may feel guilt. Society tells her that pulling back means she's selfish or ungrateful, but emotional maturity teaches her that honoring her soul's truth is not selfishness, it's alignment. And alignment is the only place from which real love, real purpose, and real peace can grow. Consider Elena, a woman in her 50s who had built a life around caring for others, a devoted wife, a nurturing mother, a loyal employee. She rarely took time for herself, believing that her worth was tied to her usefulness. Over time, however, she began to feel invisible in her own life. She wasn't angry, just tired. One evening, after cooking dinner and cleaning the kitchen in silence, she looked in the mirror and whispered, "I don't know who I am anymore." That moment, though painful, was sacred. It marked the beginning of her detachment, not from her family, but from the idea that her identity had to be tied to how much she gave to others. She began making small changes, walking alone in the mornings, reading again, exploring painting, which she hadn't done since her 20s. She didn't announce these changes. She simply began honoring the quiet voice inside her that had long been silenced. In time, her relationships transformed, not because she demanded it, but because she returned to them no longer depleted, but whole. There is a spiritual and psychological mechanism at play here. From a neurological standpoint, attachment creates familiar neural loops. When we are attached to a role in identity or even a dysfunctional relationship, our brain finds comfort in that predictability. Letting go of these attachments rewires our brain, but the process can feel disorienting. The unfamiliar is always threatening to the mind, even if it is healing to the soul. However, this is where inner work meets outer transformation. When a woman begins to detach from what no longer aligns, she begins to build new neural patterns. Patterns that prioritize authenticity over approval, presence over performance, and connection over control. This process activates the brain's prefrontal cortex, responsible for insight, compassion, and long-term vision. In other words, detachment doesn't lead to emptiness. It leads to clarity. But to get to that clarity, she must pass through the discomfort of emptiness. This is the paradox. In order to receive more, she must first become less identified with what used to define her. And this process cannot be rushed. Eastern philosophy teaches that non-attachment is not the absence of care, but the presence of clarity. It is the wisdom to love fully without clinging, to engage deeply without losing oneself, and to walk away when peace costs too much. In Taoist tradition, the river flows not by force, but by following its natural path. A woman aligned with divine timing understands that detachment is not resistance. It is flow. She no longer needs to chase or convince. She trusts that what aligns with her truth will stay, and what doesn't will naturally drift away. In relationships, this shift is often the most noticeable. When a woman is being prepared for a higher kind of love, she will first be asked to release the lesser versions she has accepted. This could mean the emotionally unavailable partner, the one-sided friendships, or the constant dynamic of overgiving. She doesn't need to argue or explain. She simply begins to feel the dissonance and gently steps away. It may be subtle. She may stop replying to certain messages. She may no longer engage in conversations that drain her spirit. She may choose silence where she once tried to fix. These acts are not cruelty. They are wisdom in motion, and this wisdom is often misunderstood by those who are not yet ready to meet her in that space of truth. There's a quiet story told in many monastic traditions about a woman who sought wisdom from a monk. She asked him how to find peace in a world filled with noise, pressure, and responsibility. The monk replied, "Empty your hands." The woman looked down, confused. "But I'm not holding anything." The monk smiled gently and said, "Not with your hands, with your heart." Detachment is the process of emptying the heart of everything that is not love, not truth, not aligned. It is the act of making space, not for less, but for more of what matters. This emotional clarity begins to reflect in her posture, her breathing, her presence. When a woman no longer clings to false identities, her nervous system begins to calm. Her breathing becomes deeper, more grounded, her shoulders soften, her voice steadies. Presence returns. She no longer rushes to respond, react, or prove. She moves with deliberateness, not because she is guarded, but because she is centered. There is a powerful physiological shift that occurs when detachment becomes embodied. The parasympathetic nervous system, responsible for rest and regulation, becomes dominant. This shift lowers stress hormones like cortisol and increases oxytocin, the hormone of bonding and connection. Ironically, the more detached she becomes from ego-based relationships, the more authentically she can connect. Detachment does not kill intimacy. It purifies it. This is why many women who undergo this transition find themselves attracting different kinds of people. Their conversations shift from gossip to growth. Their connections move from transactional to transformational. They are no longer available for half-hearted interactions because they have tasted what it feels like to be whole. A woman named Zora once shared her experience after leaving a long-term relationship. It wasn't abusive or dramatic, but she knew in her heart it was no longer aligned. "I had become so used to being half seen," she said, "that I forgot what it felt like to be fully met." After the relationship ended, she entered a long period of solitude, not loneliness, solitude. During that time, she journaled, walked in nature, studied healing modalities. She said the hardest part wasn't being alone. The hardest part was letting go of the part of her that believed she needed someone else to validate her existence. That part had grown strong through years of conditioning, but as it dissolved, something softer and stronger took its place. Zora learned to hear her own voice again. She began painting, something she hadn't done since childhood. She met people, not through apps or agendas, but through alignment. One of those people became a close friend. Another became a mentor. And in time, someone entered her life who met her not with intensity, but with presence. And she was able to receive it, not because she was lucky, but because she had made room. This is the invisible work that preceded visible blessings. Before a woman can receive something sacred, she must first create space. Detachment is the broom that sweeps the inner temple clean, and yet this process is not linear. Some days she will feel clear and empowered. Other days she will grieve the old identities she is releasing. She may even return briefly to familiar habits, not as failure, but as part of integration. Healing is not a straight line, it is a spiral, a dance, a returning. The key is not perfection, but presence. To stay aware, compassionate and curious, to ask, is this choice coming from fear or from love? And when the answer is fear, to breathe deeply, to return to the body, and to choose differently. Mastery is not about being above pain. It is about knowing how to stay present through it. And detachment at its core is an act of mastery. It is the choice to trust the unseen, to honor the sacred timing of life, and to believe that what is meant for her will not require her to betray herself to receive it. In this space of quiet detachment, something begins to awaken, a sense of possibility, a sense of readiness, not for just anything, but for something true, something sacred, something that doesn't just match her preferences, but her purpose. This is the space where blessings begin to take form, not from effort, but from embodiment, not from desperation, but from devotion, not from clinging, but from clarity. When a woman begins to feel the pull towards solitude, not as an escape, but as a calling, something profound is unfolding beneath the surface. This solitude is not about isolation. It is about integration. It is the sacred space where noise fades and inner knowing begins to speak clearly. Many may misinterpret this season in her life. Friends may say she's withdrawing. Family may worry she's becoming too quiet, too different. But solitude for the woman being prepared for a divine blessing is not a step backward. It is a step inward. It is in this stillness that she begins to encounter herself not as the world has defined her, but as she truly is. Eastern wisdom often reminds us that the flower does not open until it is ready. In the same way, solitude becomes the quiet soil where readiness is cultivated. Not through striving, but through surrender. It is here that her inner garden is tended, not with the hurried hands of ambition, but with the gentle presence of awareness. She begins to notice how much of her previous identity was shaped by the expectations of others. And she sees, perhaps for the first time, how little space she had left to discover who she was beneath all of it. There is a quiet story from the Zen tradition. A young woman asked her teacher, "How can I become wise?" The teacher replied, "Sit quietly, do nothing. Listen." The woman frowned. "That's it." The teacher smiled gently. "Until you can hear your own soul, how can you expect to hear the voice of wisdom?" This is the invitation solitude brings, not just to be alone, but to listen, to hear what has long been drowned out by noise, obligations, and distractions. At first, solitude can feel uncomfortable. It exposes everything that business once concealed, the unresolved emotions, the patterns we inherited, the inner dialogue we have ignored. A woman who enters the space may feel unease at first, but discomfort is not a sign of something wrong. It is a sign that something real is coming to the surface. From a psychological perspective, the human mind often avoids stillness because stillness allows suppressed material to rise, but it is only when this material surfaces that true healing can begin. Neuroscience shows us that solitude activates areas of the brain associated with reflection, emotional regulation, and creativity, the default mode network. an area that lights up during introspection, becomes active when we are not externally stimulated. This network supports inside memory processing and self-referential thinking. In simpler terms, solitude gives the brain space to connect the dots, to understand who we are, why we feel what we feel, and what truly matters to us. This is why the woman being prepared for something divine does not fear solitude. She learns to meet it with reverence. She understands that it is not punishment, but preparation. It is in this space that she begins to develop emotional independence, the ability to feel her feelings without needing someone else to manage them. She learns to hold space for her sadness without sinking into it, to witness her joy without clinging to it, and to meet her fears without being ruled by them. This emotional independence is not hardness. It is not detachment in the cold sense. It is softness rooted in strength. It is the quiet confidence that says, even if no one understands me right now, I am still worthy. Even if I walk this path alone for a while, I am still held. From a relational perspective, solitude refines her standards. She begins to see the difference between companionship and codependency, between love and attachment. She no longer seeks validation in empty conversations or shallow connections. She becomes willing to wait, not out of pride, but out of self-respect. She knows now that temporary companionship is not worth the cost of long-term misalignment. Consider the story of Amara, a woman in her early 40s who, after a painful breakup, chose to spend a year in solitude, not in complete isolation, but in intentional quiet. She stopped dating. She reduced her social circle. She committed to weekly walks by the lake near her home and daily meditation. At first, she said, the silence was deafening. Her phone, once always buzzing, grew quiet. Her evenings, once filled with company, became spacious. I felt like I was disappearing, she said, but over time she realized something else was happening. She wasn't disappearing, she was emerging. During that year, Amara began journaling every day. She wrote letters to herself, to her younger self, to the woman she wanted to become. She started attending therapy. She explored the roots of her patterns, why she always chose emotionally unavailable partners, why she feared being truly seen. It was hard work, uncomfortable work, but it was sacred. By the end of that year, she said, I no longer need someone else to fill the silence. I've learned to trust what it's teaching me. Solitude, when embraced with intention, becomes a teacher. It teaches patience. Because growth does not happen on demand, it teaches humility. Because the ego's narratives begin to dissolve in quiet. And, most importantly, it teaches discernment. Because when the noise fades, truth becomes clearer. In Eastern practices, solitude is often seen as a form of spiritual discipline, not because one must separate from the world, but because to engage the world with clarity, one must first disengage from illusion. Illusion here means the beliefs, rules, and attachments that cloud perception. When a woman sits alone long enough, the illusions begin to crumble. She starts to see where she has been compromising her truth to be accepted. She begins to see how often she gave away her energy just to avoid feeling lonely. And in that seeing, she begins to reclaim herself. In solitude, the body also begins to shift. The nervous system, often overstimulated by constant engagement, begins to regulate. Heart rate stabilizes. Breathing deepens, the mind becomes less reactive. Presence becomes natural rather than forced. This physiological calm translates into emotional clarity. She can now distinguish between a reaction and a response, between fear and intuition. And this clarity is what prepares her for what is coming. There is a sacred irony here. The very solitude that others may fear is what makes her magnetic. Not in a superficial way, but in an energetic way, she becomes a woman whose presence suits. She listens more deeply, speaks more truthfully, moves more intentionally. She no longer needs to prove anything. Her stillness becomes her power. This is the kind of woman who enters a room and changes it without saying a word. Not because of what she's wearing or how she looks, but because of how she's being. There is peace in her eyes, groundedness in her posture, integrity in her voice, and others feel it even if they can't name it. From a relationship perspective, solitude has taught her what she will and will not accept. She is no longer impressed by charm without character or attention without depth. She doesn't need grand gestures. She values quiet consistency. She doesn't chase. She attracts not through manipulation, but through magnetism. And that magnetism comes not from trying to be loved, but from being fully herself. She is not desperate. She is discerning. She is not closed off. She is cautious with good reason. She has learned, perhaps through heartbreak, that not every hand that reaches for her is meant to hold her, and she is no longer afraid to walk alone if it means protecting her peace. This doesn't make her cold. It makes her clear. Clarity is what solitude gives, and clarity is the greatest gift a woman can carry into any relationship. Because with clarity, she does not confuse chemistry for compatibility. She does not mistake intensity for intimacy. She knows the difference between a connection that expands her and one that diminishes her. She knows how to listen to her body, how it tightens or relaxes in someone's presence. She knows when her energy rises and when it dims. She becomes fluent in the language of intuition, and intuition is always sharpened in silence. There's an old proverb that says, "In the silence of the heart, God speaks." This is what solitude reveals, that we are not alone in the way we fear. That within the quiet, there is a presence. Call it God, call it source, call it inner wisdom. But it is real. And once a woman touches it, she cannot go back to pretending. She needs external validation to feel whole. She begins to see that the partner she desires must be able to meet her in that same depth. Not because she demands it, but because she has become it. She does not ask for what she is not willing to embody. And this makes her rare, not perfect, but rare because in a world that often rewards performance, she has chosen presence. In a world that encourages noise, she has chosen stillness. In a world that praises business, she has chosen intentionality. She is not waiting. She is preparing. She is not longing. She is aligning. And when she finally does open her heart again, it will not be out of loneliness. It will be from fullness. Her love will not be given out of need, but out of overflow. And that kind of N is powerful. It is not possessive. It is not fragile. It does not fear silence because it was born in silence. A man who meets her in this space will not be intimidated by her depth. He will recognize it. Because he has met himself in his own solitude, their connection will not be a distraction from themselves, but a deepening into themselves. They will not complete each other. They will complement each other. Two whole beings walking side by side. Solitude is the furnace in which this kind of woman is forged, not because she has rejected the world, but because she has embraced her own. And now she walks not with arrogance, but with assurance, not seeking approval, but seeking alignment, not looking for completion, but for companionship that honors the completeness she has already found. This is what it means to be prepared, not just for a relationship, but for a blessing. A blessing that will not pull her out of herself, but will meet her exactly where she is, whole. Aware and ready when a woman starts to feel increasingly drawn to her body, not as an object to perfect or a project to fix, but as a temple to listen to. It is often a sign that something profound is awakening. This shift is subtle but unmistakable. She becomes more attuned to how she breathes, how she walks, how she holds tension in her shoulders or softness in her belly. Her body becomes not just a carrier of her life, but the messenger of her spirit. She may not yet understand why she suddenly craves deeper rest, cleaner foods, more movement or moments of stillness, but the longing is not random. It is intelligence rising from within. It is preparation. Physiologically, the body stores memory. This is not metaphor, but science. Every experience, every emotional imprint, every unspoken word and unlived truths is recorded not just in the mind, but in the fascia, muscles, nervous system. Somatic psychology teaches us that unresolved emotional pain often manifests physically tight hips from suppressed grief, clenched jaws from years of silence, shallow breathing from long-held anxiety. And so when a woman begins to turn her attention inward and becomes curious about her body's signals, she is not being self-indulgent. She is becoming self-aware. This journey toward embodiment is sacred in many Eastern traditions. The body is not seen as separate from spiritual practice, but as the very vessel through which it unfolds. Mastery of the self is not achieved by transcending the body, but by becoming fully present in it. In Taoist philosophy, the body is the garden where the energy of heaven and earth meet, and to live in disharmony with the body is to create misalignment, not only physically, but emotionally and relationally as well. When a woman starts waking up with the urge to stretch rather than scroll, to sit in silence rather than consume, to nourish rather than numb, it is her nervous system asking for regulation. It is her intuition whispering that her future will require a level of presence she cannot fake. Real love, real purpose, and real blessing do not land in a disembodied life. They require a grounded one, and grounding begins with presence in the body. Neuroscience now confirms that deep, conscious breathing and slow, mindful movement directly affect the vagus nerve, the main highway between the brain and the body that governs emotional regulation, heart rate variability, digestion, and immune response. In moments of stress or threat, the body tightens, the breath becomes shallow, the mind becomes hypervigilant. But with intentional breathwork, a walk in nature, a slow yoga, flow, or even placing a hand over the heart and offering conscious attention, the parasympathetic nervous system activates, signaling safety, connection, and receptivity. This physiological shift is not only healing, it is magnetic. A woman who lives in her body sends out a different signal. She radiates closer energy, feels safe. She does not speak from tension, but from tone. She listens not only to words, but to resonance. In a relationship, this becomes her quiet superpower, because when she is embodied, she is no longer easily manipulated by outer noise. She can sense when something is off, even if it sounds right. She can feel the difference between sincerity and performance. She doesn't just hear what's said, she feels what is meant. This embodiment also creates a kind of emotional sovereignty. She stops outsourcing her power to someone else's attention or approval. She no longer needs to be chased in order to feel desirable, nor does she chase in order to feel worthy. She holds herself in a way that invites presence, not performance. And when someone steps into her space, they are met not with desperation, but with depth. There is a quote from Clarissa Pinkola Estes that says, "A woman must be able to stand in the storm and not shrink back. But to do that, she must first learn to stand in her own skin and not abandon herself." Consider the story of Leora, a woman in her mid-50s who, after years of chronic fatigue and low self-worth, decided to change not her life circumstances first, but her relationship with her body. She began with breathwork, just 5 minutes a day. Then she introduced slow walking meditations in the forest near her home. Over time, she stopped eating in front of the television and instead lit candles at her dinner table, eating in silence, feeling each bite. These weren't grand changes, but they were consistent, and something began to shift. Her posture changed, her digestion improved, but more than anything, her relationship shifted. She stopped saying yes when she meant no. She left the relationship. That had become more draining than nurturing. And when asked how she found the courage, she said, "I stopped treating my body like a servant and started treating it like a friend. And I realized I didn't want my friend to suffer anymore." This kind of embodiment creates alignment between body, mind, and emotion. And in this alignment, something sacred happens. Desire becomes discernment. Cravings turn into clarity. The woman no longer asks, "What do I want to feel in this moment?" She begins to ask, "What does my body need to feel safe, alive, and aligned?" And that question changes everything. It changes how she speaks, how she relates, how she loves. In relationships, embodiment is a form of presence that cannot be faked. A partner may forget what you said, but they will not forget how you made them feel in your presence. Embodiment allows a woman to slow down enough to respond instead of react. It allows her to feel the pulse of a moment and to act from grounded truth rather than wounded habit. It is what allows her to hold tension without collapsing, to communicate with clarity instead of confusion, to create space instead of drama. In the martial arts tradition, every movement begins with the breath. The body moves as one, and the master does not waste energy. Every gesture is efficient, intentional, clean. This is not because they are trying harder, but because they are more attuned. A woman in her body becomes a master of her space. She doesn't need to dominate it. She becomes it. She doesn't need to be the loudest in the room. She becomes the most aligned. There's a story in the Japanese art of kintsugi where broken pottery is repaired with gold. The cracks are not hidden, but highlighted, because the vessel is not less valuable after breaking. It is more. This story reflects the journey of embodiment. Many women come into their bodies only after breaking through illness, heartbreak, betrayal, or burnout. And yet in listening to the body's whispers, then its cries, then finally its wisdom, they begin to heal. The goal in this case is, and awareness is, what prepares her to receive what is sacred. Imagine a woman who once ignored her body's fatigue to keep everyone else comfortable, who once tolerated disrespect because she believed her worth came from being chosen, who once numbed her intuition because it made others uncomfortable. Now, that woman begins to breathe more deeply. She begins to feel the ground beneath her feet. She learns to soften her belly, to unclench her fists, to speak slowly, not out of fear, but out of reverence for her own nervous system. She realizes she cannot rush her way into peace. She must relax into it. And in that relaxation, she becomes more magnetic, not because of appearance, but because of energy. People feel different in her presence. They slow down, they listen more, they feel seen. This is not seduction, it is coherence, and coherence is healing. A coherent body becomes a tuning fork for truth. It does not betray itself for belonging. It does not twist itself into shapes for approval. It does not override its own signals. It becomes a compass, and this compass is essential for discerning who to trust, what path to take, and what blessings are truly aligned. When the body says yes, it expands. When it says no, it contracts. But if we have spent a lifetime overriding those signals, we no longer trust ourselves. Embodiment is the journey of remembering that the body is not a liar. It only speaks in sensations, not in words. And those sensations are the language of soul. A woman who becomes fluent in this language will not be easily swayed by flattery. She will not be seduced by potential. She will sense whether someone's energy calms her or confuses her, whether they bring peace or provoke anxiety. And this sensing is not paranoia. It is protection. It is presence. This is the wisdom of embodiment. It is not loud. It does not demand. It simply knows, and in that knowing, she begins to honor herself. She says no without guilt, yes without fear. She chooses presence over performance, depth over distraction, rest over rush. In relationships, this woman becomes a sacred mirror. Her embodiment reflects where others are disembodied, and while that may intimidate some, it will also awaken others. She doesn't need to teach with words. She teaches by being. Her partner may feel more grounded around her, more open, more honest. Not because she forces it, but because her presence invites it. This is not about being perfect. It is about being honest. Being embodied does not mean she never feels fear. It means she feels it and doesn't abandon herself. It means she breathes through discomfort. She moves with intention. She chooses the path of alignment, even when it's unfamiliar. And as she continues this journey of listening, breathing, softening, standing, she becomes the very space into which blessings can land. Not because she is trying to be ready, but because she is willing to be real. The body does not lie. And when a woman begins to trust her body again, she begins to trust life. She becomes both the storm and the stillness, the flame and the foundation. And in this sacred rhythm, she prepares not only to receive love, but to embody it. When a woman begins to feel more peace in being alone than in being surrounded by people who don't understand her, something essential is transforming within her. This transformation is not always comfortable at first. It often arrives after years of exhausting relationships, surface-level conversations, and the quiet pain of constantly needing to explain herself to those unwilling or unable to truly see her. The shift doesn't happen all at once. It begins like a murmur deep in the soul, a tiredness of noise, a disinterest in pretending. A gentle pulling inward. She may not fully understand why she starts cancelling social invitations or why she no longer feels energized by the company she once kept. But what she is experiencing is not disconnection. It is recalibration in a world that conditions women to believe that their value comes from being chosen. Included, praised, or desired, solitude becomes a revolutionary act of self-recognition. Not isolation, but intentional solitude, the kind that makes room for clarity. The kind that reminds her that being alone and being lonely are not the same. In modern psychology, we refer to this as differentiation. It is the ability to maintain one's sense of self while in connection with others. A woman who finds peace in solitude is often a woman who has reached a threshold where she can no longer betray her own essence. Just to maintain relational comfort, she has learned through experience, and often through pain, that proximity is not intimacy, that noise is not nourishment, that being tolerated is not the same as being treasured. This awakening does not make her bitter, it makes her precise. Where she once sought validation, she now seeks resonance. Where she once feared rejection, she now fears misalignment. And as she begins to choose herself, not out of arrogance, but out of necessity, her energy becomes more focused, her presence more refined. This is not withdrawal, it is refinement, and it is a sign that something larger is preparing her from within. In Eastern wisdom traditions, the retreat into solitude is often the space where one cultivates inner stillness, which is the prerequisite for clarity. The Shaolin monks spend hours in silence, not because they have nothing to say, but because they are learning to listen, to truly listen not only to the outer world, but to the rhythm of their own breath, the beat of their own heart, the direction of their inner compass. This discipline of listening becomes the foundation for self-mastery. In the same way, a woman who begins to feel more peace in her own company than in the company of confusion is not failing. She is evolving. Relationships are sacred, yes, but not all relationships are meant to go with us into every season. There are people who walk with us for a time, but whose presence becomes disruptive once we begin to rise. This disruption often appears as fatigue, self-doubt, or emotional constriction after spending time with them. Our nervous system responds before we even understand why. And for the woman who is becoming more sensitive to peace, this disruption becomes intolerable. Not because she's dramatic, but because she's healing. And healing sharpens our inner receptors for truth. There is a story of a woman named Alina who spent years in what appeared to be a healthy relationship. On the surface, everything seemed fine. Mutual respect, shared routines, polite exchanges. But Elena often found herself silencing her real thoughts in order to keep the peace. She withheld her emotions because she feared being misunderstood. She avoided topics that made her feel too vulnerable, and over time she realized she was losing parts of herself just to maintain the illusion of harmony. One evening, after yet another dinner filled with small talk and no real connection, she sat on her balcony alone and felt an overwhelming peace wash over her. No one was there. No one was demanding her to shrink. And in that moment, she knew the peace of solitude was more nourishing than the performance of togetherness. This kind of peace is not apathy, it is alignment. When a woman learns to love her own company, she becomes less willing to entertain energies that disturb her inner harmony. She no longer needs to be seen to feel real. She no longer needs to be held to feel hope. She knows how to regulate her own emotional state, and this regulation creates a kind of freedom that cannot be replicated by external attention. It is the freedom of coming home to oneself. From a neurological perspective, the capacity to be alone and at ease is a sign of a well-regulated nervous system. In early childhood development, the presence of a safe, attuned caregiver allows the infant to internalize safety and self-soothing. But many women grow up without this foundation. Instead, they learn to attach anxiously, constantly scanning for connection, approval, or abandonment. When this attachment style persists into adulthood, solitude can feel unbearable. But as she begins to heal, often through therapy, meditation, or mindful embodiment, she develops what is called secure attachment to the self. She becomes her own safe space. This self-regulation, calming herself through breath, stillness, or body awareness, is not just a coping strategy, it is a powerful magnetism. Because in a relationship, emotional independence becomes the ground for emotional intimacy. A woman who can sit in silence without panic, who can process her emotions without exploding, who can express her needs without manipulation. She becomes a rare and stabilizing force. She no longer projects her chaos onto others. She carries her center with her, and this center becomes the sanctuary from which she relates. This is why the peace found in solitude is so sacred. It is not the absence of relationship, but the preparation for sacred ones. Relationships formed from inner stillness are different. They are not based on urgency, fantasy, or filling a void. They are based on resonance, shared values, and mutual embodiment. And a woman who finds peace in solitude will not settle for a relationship that feels like noise. There is a poem that says, "I sat with my soul until I fell in love with her." This is the essence of the shift. The woman who once anxiously waited for a message, who once accepted crumbs just to feel connection, who once tolerated confusion as a substitute for intimacy. She now lights a candle and writes in her journal. She plays music that speaks to her spirit. She walks through the forest and lets the silence answer her questions. And in doing so, she becomes a woman who no longer asks, "Will someone love me?" but rather, "Will this love align with my peace?" This is not loneliness, this is sovereignty. And in this state, she is not against love, she is preparing for it. She is no longer afraid to walk away from conversations that drain her. She is no longer willing to explain her worth to those committed to misunderstanding her. She is no longer seduced by charm if it does not come with consistency. She waits not in desperation, but in discernment. In practical terms, this might look like choosing a quiet evening over another social gathering that leaves her feeling empty. It might look like ending a situationship that brings more confusion than clarity. It might look like declining a second date, even if he checks all the boxes, because something in her body does not feel safe. And in making these choices, she is not being picky. She's being protective of her peace. When she cultivates an unwavering commitment to her authenticity, she sheds the need to perform or conform, radiating a genuine presence that repels superficial connections and attracts those who value her true self. This profound self-honoring ensures she no longer compromises her essence for external acceptance, becoming a beacon for sincere relationships. Furthermore, by embracing radical self-compassion, she fosters a deep well of kindness and understanding for her own journey, acknowledging her imperfections without judgment. This inner acceptance fortifies her against external criticism and fosters a resilient spirit that allows her to navigate challenges with grace, knowing her worth is inherent, not conditional. The transformation detailed in this transcript highlights a profound journey from external validation to internal wholeness, forged through the power of solitude and the wisdom of embodiment. This path empowers a woman to cultivate a deep sense of self, preparing her not just for relationships, but for a life of authentic blessings. She learns to trust her inner compass, ensuring that any love she invites into her life aligns with her hard-won peace and completeness. If this video resonated with you, please like it, subscribe for more insights, and leave a comment sharing your thoughts. I'm your host, Alfred, and I read every comment.